Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by Dr. Joe Malone. Welcome back, Dr. Joe.
Great to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you back. And today we're going to be talking about the humiliation of hookup culture, which was a topic you suggested. And it kind of surprised me because I don't think of hookup culture as being humiliating very often. I can think of a lot of other words for it, but not that one. So it was something that intrigued me that I definitely want to talk about. So yeah, I guess we should just dive into that. And I guess my first question would just be, what made you start thinking about hookup culture as humiliating? What brought you into that research? What motivated you to study it?
That's an excellent question. And it's actually the most important question because it's what brought me into this whole field. I was working with a university here in Tennessee and I had created a women's personal conditioning class. And it turned out to be a total women's program, a wellness program, because sorority women were in the class a lot, and they had me come to their sororities and work with them. But it was physical. It was the strength training. It was working with their nutrition, that type of thing. In doing the PhD that followed that, they shared with me a lot of things because I interviewed them, 32 of them in depth, and then also had 10 focus groups that were classes of mine, all women classes. And the strongest thing that came out was not the nutrition, not the exercise, although there's the typical problems with that. It was this thing they called hookup culture that I really I'd heard of it before, but I had no idea um, how bad it was on them. I mean, for them, what they were going through with it, as far as not having relationships when they wanted to have relationships, they needed to have relationships. It was really a tearing emotional situation for them. Heartbreak, heartache everywhere. I could see that it was causing a lot more harm than what I had originally anticipated. The lack of exercise and eating badly on the campus. So I went to my dissertation committee literally and asked them. I told them I've come across this situation, this issue called hookup culture in this casual sex environment, and from my observations, it's a lot more harmful to them than anything else that I've come across. So I said, would you mind if I switch the focus of my PhD and the dissertation and that type of thing to this sexual wellness as opposed to overall college women's wellness? And they
Did you
said,
say that? Oh, sorry. Finish your story. I
no,
had a question, but yeah.
I'll just finish that and then your question. I'll look
Okay.
forward to it. They said nobody else is doing that we know of, and we think that would be a great idea. So they approved it. So, and what was your question?
Well, my question was, did you say that the hookup culture was causing the girls to not exercise and eat badly, or that you were expecting not exercising and eating badly to be the things that were harming them, and it was actually the hookup culture? I think I
Yeah,
misunderstood that.
I was expecting the not exercising and eating badly on campus to be the thing that was most harmful to them. But
Okay.
wasn't even aware, Colleen, of this hookup culture phenomenon. I mean, I was there every day. I taught there for 12 years, and I
Mhm.
was around them. I had both co-ed classes as well, and I didn't pick up that this was going on. Of course, I guess a professor you wouldn't pick up on that type of thing. But once my eyes were open to it, then I started realizing this is something that's so much different than when I was an undergraduate. Of course, that was a long time ago, but um, it just was something unreal to me because they started sharing with me that they were expected, if they actually liked a guy, to not have sex with him and only have sex with the guys that they didn't like because they were the word was don't catch feelings from any of the guys that
Mm.
you're with and that type of thing. So I
Did
mean,
they
it seemed
share with
crazy to
you
me.
what motivated them to be a part of that culture? Like, did they share, like, why was that going on? Was that something that these girls wanted, or that they just kind of ended up in this environment where this was expected and they just went with the flow?
Well, the second description again, it would be the one that applies. And again, since then, I've done a whole lot of research. It's been 7 years since I stopped teaching. I actually was canceled because I was refusing to go along with the social construction of sex and gender. I kept insisting on teaching the biological basis of it. And my research really went into that, the biological basis of it. And what I found out was that it really goes against their sexual nature. What I mean by that is 80 to 85% of young women will have the tendency, again, this is coming from the biology that underpins it. And
Mhm.
I can explain that in a minute if you'd like. But 80 to 85% of these young women would rather not take part in casual sex and that type of thing, but they felt that they had to because everybody else was doing it. Even we have scientifically actually a word for this: pluralistic ignorance. They were ignorant that the way it is on most college campuses, the percentage go like this: 30% of women are not taking part in casual sex at all. About 15%, 10 to 15% are actually, let's just say the top 10% of the guys and the top 10% of the women are taking part in it heavily, because 50% of the sexual encounters happen with those top 10% of women and men. They're very, very, very promiscuous. And so your 55 or so percent that are left between the 30% that aren't having any sex at all and the 10% that are having it all the time, that 55% who we're talking about here, they think they're supposed to have sex or they're going to be left out because everybody else is. Actually, it's just something they perceive, and they perceive the norms on campus to be that way because from the beginning, most of them, we're talking about secular universities, most of them go to orientations where they're given the impression that, okay, we know you guys are going to be sexually active, so here's a student health center, to go get problems fixed. Here's condoms for you, free condoms, that type of thing. So, and again, the authorities on campus, and this is something I have a problem with, and I'm trying to work against, trying to work to change. The authorities on campus are giving the message that everybody is sexually active, as well as what they're picking up from their peers. So, this pluralistic ignorance really drives the 55%, which are the
That's
vast majority of them, to take part when they probably wouldn't
That's really
otherwise.
interesting because I had Monica Leal Klein on the podcast in December, and she was saying that that's how Planned Parenthood, when they do sex ed, encourages, like implicitly encourages students to have sex, casual sex, is that they walk into it saying, instead of saying, if you have sex someday, this is what you might face, assuming that all these children are sexually active and talking to them as if, like, well, when you have sex, as we know you're doing implicitly, this is what's going to be going on, this is what you need to worry about. And so that's like a way of like implicitly convincing people that it's something that they should be doing at that stage of their life.
Right. I found out again since then that was I really kind of got started on this formally about in 2017.
Okay.
Since then, I found there's a whole lot of implicit pressure, I guess you'd say, on young people, especially young women. And again, as I was saying, about 80 to 85% of young women don't have the nature that goes along with this. They're kind of built to bond, and
Mhm.
they don't want to have sex outside of a really, really strong relationship, and hopefully, in many cases, a marriage relationship.
Mhm.
Um, but that leaves about 10 to 15% that, because of, and this is a hard fact for me to grapple with because I'd like to just be able to say, hey, all women, to men's groups when I talk to them, all women don't want to do this. You're forcing them to do this. But there's about 10 to 15%, the research shows, that because of circumstances before they were born, in their mother's womb, in utero, they they're exposed to more testosterone, higher testosterone levels than your typical woman is. And what that does is it has a tendency, it's not high enough to make their genitalia, not be female genitalia, but it is high enough and throughout the 3 trimesters of the pregnancy to influence their brains to be organized in more of a male typical way. And so those, and then also there's some women, and this is pretty rare, but some women that are either bipolar, which has a tendency to raise their, what they call sociosexuality, their willingness to have casual sex and read porn and that type of thing, look at porn. And then also congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which causes females. It happens in both sexes, but with females, it causes them to be masculinized. Okay, so and there's a couple other situations where women have higher testosterone than they would normally, and they found that they've also have this higher sex drive and this higher willingness to engage in this casual sex. But that's 10 to 15%, overall. So you got, again, 80 to 85% that this is really going against their sexual nature in a bad way. So interestingly, on the other side, on the male side, this is what complicates things. I think this is what causes a lot of sexual conflict, as we say in the sexual science. The men, on average, have about 80% of them that are willing to take part in casual sex if it's available. About 20% of them are not off the top. And that 20% happen. It's interesting as well. The 20% of men who are not willing to take part in casual sex, who desire the same way as the 80%, I'm using round figures here, the 80% of women that want an exclusive bonded relationship, that 20% also of men is also the highest IQ of the men. So high IQ and men relate to wanting to have an exclusive relationship. Women, not, no, it's not. There's no correlation between women's IQ and their desire to have an exclusive relationship. So you get the smartest guys, and you get 20% of the guys, and then you get 80% of the women that want the same thing. But then you've got your 80% of the guys that want casual sex if they can have it, if they can get it, and you got your 15% of women who want 10 to 15%, maybe 20. I'm being generous there. That
Have
want it.
you
So
heard have you
yeah.
heard of the dating project at Boston College?
I've not only heard of it, I admire it. I actually bought it
Okay.
because I wanted to use it with some students. I haven't had an opportunity yet to, but I would like to, because it really has a lot of great points along this way. But go ahead. What were you going to say about it?
Well, I was reading a little bit about it, and I think it was Dr. Carrie Cronin who's the one who came up with it originally. And basically, she realized that because of the hookup culture, students weren't going on dates. So she was, I think, making it a class assignment for students to go on dates. But in her research, she said that she was surprised that girls tended to be the ones perpetuating hookup culture, not the men. That the men wanted to settle down, they wanted steady relationships, but girls, because they'd been fed this story throughout society for their whole life that you either get a family or a career, thought that getting into a serious relationship would jeopardize their ability to have a career. And they're like, we're in college. We want to be X, Y, or Z. We need to pursue that. We can't get stuck in a relationship. And so they were the ones perpetuating the hookup casual sex culture versus the guys wanted steady relationships. What are your thoughts on that?
That's interesting. I'm a big admirer of hers, as I said earlier, and her project. Um, I think it would make sense because, again, Boston College, which is where I think she's at, or at least she was at when she did the dating project. You're probably going to have the self-selected, in the top 20% of IQ, and the guys that are there. Um, and also the women. I think that there's a lot of truth to that, conditioning, kind of grooming. Girls and young women get groomed, I think, from that high school transition into college, that they're expected to do this, and if they don't put out, I think one of the big things, and I've heard this described from the young women themselves, and then others that are close to them, that they have it in their mind that if they aren't sexually active with Jim, the guy that all the girls want, then they don't have a chance, because Lydia over here, she's definitely gonna have sex with him, and then Jennifer and Jade and whoever else is gonna, they're gonna be willing to do it, and if she's not willing to do it, then she's gonna put herself out of the pool. But
Mhm.
my research and others has actually shown that to be quite the opposite of what it actually is. So we may have talked about this before, but I'll repeat it because I think it's too important not to. Actually, with men, and Carrie Cronin may have found this, in her research up there as well. Men have a tendency to, when they do want to bond, when they're looking for a marriage partner, it's the ones that don't have sex with them that they're considered seriously, and not the ones that do. And again, there's a process that we may have talked about before, where they have a vasopressin, major bonding chemical, and it doesn't
Mhm.
it doesn't stay in the brain if sex to orgasm is happening
Mhm.
readily. It only stays in the brain if a guy is around a woman that he's attracted to, and they don't actually have sex. So if it's in there long enough, to make a long story short, it creates the receptors for itself, and that's where a man actually falls in love. And so after that, when his vasopressin bonding occurs, then it lowers his testosterone enough to where oxytocin, which is also present in men, also it has a second bonding mechanism on it. So those things most young women don't know, but grandmothers of their grandmothers or great grandmothers, that's why their relationships were so much more successful
Hmm.
than their granddaughters and great granddaughters, is because they lived by that rule. A couple other quick things to add to that, just for anybody that's listening to this, especially young women or people that counsel young women. Men, because of paternal certainty, they want to make sure, and this goes way back into our ancient past, because in our species, we only have internal fertilization, internal gestation. Um, the woman's the only one that really knows who the father is. So, for a man that's going to invest in, especially these days with so many other options that they have, if they're going to invest in a marriage relationship, they're going to want to know for sure that their wife is going to be bearing their children and nobody else's. And the best indicator of that is how sexually available she is before a marriage. That's literally the best indicator of adultery is premarital sexual partners, and the number of them. For men, and women should hear this clearly. For men, the number one and number two things that they look for in a marriage partner is sexual loyalty and sexual integrity. And so, women that don't display those things to them, they're probably not going to be interested in as a marriage partner. Yes, as a sex partner. Yes, as a hookup, and see you later afterwards. So one other thing too, in that kind of situation where a man hooks up with a woman, typically what he'll do is he'll be so excited about her, and she's such a great, she's so beautiful, she's so funny, she's so smart. But what the research has shown on that is that within 10 seconds after unmarried sex takes place and completion, so to speak, um, her stature in his eyes starts going down. She's not as pretty as she was. She isn't as smart. She isn't as funny. All these things, because of the difference in the bonding, because it only takes oxytocin and dopamine, which women readily get from a sexual encounter, including to orgasm. Um, she will bond him readily in the hookup, and so she's very, very much, she starts seeing him. He's more handsome than he was before. He's a smarter. He's funnier. All these things. It's just the opposite. It's an opposite type of a reaction, and that's what I found eventually in my research was the reason that the young women I was dealing with there at the university, it was such a mismatch between the way they felt about the hookup situation and the result of it and that type of thing compared to the guys. Literally, here's some hookup effects on women. 70. This is what the research has shown. I'm going to look at my notes here. 78% of women regret it, and these are college women. Uh, Far more women are depressed afterwards than men. Women have a lower self-esteem afterwards than men. They have higher general distress than the men do. And this final one is kind of goes along with what I was talking about the oxytocin bonding. They want it to turn into a relationship in many, many cases, and probably maybe even in most cases. So, um, what I found out, Colleen, was this is a really ugly situation, and it's really at the root of much, I think, of our societal ills and problems. Because if this can be fixed, and if we can get young people back on a more traditional courtship, traditional marriage, traditional family trajectory, um, it just that the ripple effect from there solves a lot of human problems. So I'll stop
Mhm.
there. Do you have
Well,
more questions?
I was gonna ask, like, why do you say it's humiliating then? Is it because the girls are coming out of this with a lower self-esteem, or was there something else you saw that led you to say humiliation of hookup culture?
Well, to be totally honest, humiliation of hookup culture, I like the way it goes together. But there's a word for it I can't think of right now, but it was humiliating what I observed, and not only from the young women themselves, but I was dealing with a lot of sorority advisors, and these are not quite as young women, that are advising these sororities, and they just sat down with me one day. It was around one of the. This is when I would literally go into the sorority and do exercise sessions with them with resistance bands, and that type of thing, and show them all this different nutrition, examples. And then, but after that, I started having these what we call sex IQ sessions where I was teaching them these things. But I sat down with this group, this advisors, and we just started kind of having a conversation. And they just brought up right away to me. They said, and of course they were seeing close up because they were living with them, like house mothers, that type of thing. Um, they said, we don't understand why these girls let these guys treat them the way that they do, because they use and abuse them. I mean, these are the words that they were using,
Mm-hmm.
and they just went on for like a half hour of how bad this was, and and they said these girls don't have the kind of self-esteem. They don't have the dignity that they need to be able to say no to these guys, and to say that it's going to be under certain circumstances, certain situations, and certain amount of commitment. So um, they made it real clear to me. And these are like women that are 25 to 30, maybe 35 years old, so they aren't too far out of it. But it was different even for them, when they were in school, because it wasn't this situation. So this is developed. Again, we're talking, 2015, 2016, when I was having this conversation. So it's a while back, but we're talking about maybe 2007, 2008, and previous. It probably wasn't this that nearly as much as there is now. It's just developed, I would say, from about 2010 to now. It's gotten outrageous.
What do you think
So,
changed?
well, I think there's a lot of things, if you think about from 2010 to 2024, that have changed in not a good direction. I think social media has been a big part of it. I think there's a lot of comparison that goes on, especially with these young women.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Social media is much tougher on young women than it is on guys that age.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a
Hold
problem we'll
low
talk about
still.
with the guys in a minute here, but they're comparing themselves to each other. They're comparing to millions, possibly millions of other women. There's all the things that go on with how they make their, women make their appearances, brush their appearances up on there.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Tinder apps and etc. All the dating apps where there's such a variety possible for these guys. And the way I understand it, the research shows is that there's a small number of guys, kind of alpha males, that the women all seem to want, and then most of the guys they don't get the swipe, they don't get the approval. So, but on the other hand, the women do get the approval. They get swiped, no matter what level of looks that they are. So it's set up. I'd say from 2008 or so forward, when we really started getting the iPhone in, and everybody's got that information in their pocket or their purse. I think it's really set up a situation that was already moving in a bad direction for young
Mm-hmm.
people. It just put it on steroids, so to speak. So, and the
Interesting.
women, I think, since it's so much against your nature and all your other women that I think it's most destructive to them. But here's the thing I'll say about those same things I just said. Those same factors, the internet basically, and all the apps that go along with it,
Mm-hmm.
social media. With guys, it's not so much the social media that does them in; it's the gaming and the different thing, porn. Again, there's a fair number of women, not a fair, but a small and growing number, unfortunately, of women that porn starting to affect. But in 2009, when they're trying to start the studies on porn on college campuses, they couldn't, because they couldn't find a control group of guys that weren't watching it. So it was like they couldn't get anybody. They couldn't find anybody that would be the control group.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very widespread. It's much more widespread than other addictive type things, because it's a natural high for us, just like food is a natural high for us, and so that's why we have such high obesity rates. So
Do you
all
think
that
it's
said,
do you
guys
think it's
wander
causing
off into
guys?
their own world, using their phones and the internet and that type of thing, and so it's unhealthy for them too. So it's just, in answer to your question, this is like a perfect storm, I
Mm-hmm.
think, of really a bad situation already, and then you exacerbate it with the electronics and the social media, all the different ways that young people these days also disassociate themselves from each other in person. They're not in person as much as they were, and they're afraid. They get afraid, I mean, these Carrie Cronin's project up there, the dating project, that was pretty clear, and that was like 2014 or 13, maybe she was doing that. They were afraid. The guys were afraid to ask the girls out. They didn't know how to talk to them face to face, and we've had 10 years, since then. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I also think it kind of ties what you're saying about guys being afraid. It ties back into like girls being afraid too. I know I've talked to guys that went to secular college campuses and they were saying that if they offered to like walk a girl to the car to make sure she's safe, the girl would take that as you might want to attack me or something like that and wouldn't be safe in that situation. Or they would just be offended that a guy wanted to do that and they were strong, independent women and they could go themselves. So I think that the way that the girls are acting are putting men in these positions where they're afraid to ask the girls out as well, which was interesting. Do you think, going back to what you were saying about porn, do you think porn is making men hook up more or less?
Less. I
Okay.
think it's taking the place of. I think it's taking the place of sex with women in many cases.
Hmm.
So, and again, the unfortunate thing on porn. Well, there's porn altogether is unfortunate. I think, but it's almost hard to pick something out. You know, it's so unnatural as far as the stimulation it provides to both sexes again, but especially to men because of the way our brains. I think we've gone through that. Our brains are so much more
Hmm.
sexually high powered than the typical woman's. We have so much more testosterone. We have 10 to 20 times more testosterone than women do, and the brain is sexually is sensitive to testosterone levels.
Hmm.
So it's like a cornucopia, of sexual stimulation that may oftentimes start out as fairly innocent. I mean, not innocent, but not high level. But the way that works on the brain and the dopamine receptors, which is dopamine is the craving chemical and it's the reward accountant chemical. It's the thing that tells you there's going to be a reward after you do this. So it's not the reward itself. People get that mixed up. It's the thing that tells you you're going to get probably a load of opioids, after after you do this. Um, yeah. So the thing is, it can offer so much novelty to men in in like a 2 hour session, so much novelty and so many situations that seem to ramp up. I mean, and that's what a young man or boy will want to do is the dopamine receptors start to fade away a bit when they're overloaded like that, when they're just
Hmm.
overwhelmed by that load of a dopamine coming in and that often reading it and watching it that often. And so you have to, it's just like any other classic drug addiction, you have to have more and more, bigger and bigger dose of it. And so what typically happens is they go from less extreme, situations that they're watching to more and more and more extremes and violence. Um, you know, the ultimate problem probably is, child porn and that type of thing, where they
Hmm.
even go. Some of them even go in that direction. I think you have to have a tendency that way. I don't think that everybody or typical maybe guys would go that way, but there's a certain percentage in that do. So yeah.
And do you think the fact that so many men are watching porn is exacerbating the hookup culture on behalf of girls because girls feel like they have to compete? Like, oh, this like guy that I'm interested in, or I guess although you were saying the girls were afraid of catching feelings, so they were sleeping with guys they didn't care about. So maybe this doesn't make sense. But basically girls thinking that they have to compete with porn, so they might as well let the guy have it.
Yeah, I think the instruction they've got on not catching feelings, I don't think that's gone
Okay.
very far in reality. So I think your suspicion is right that they think they have to compete with porn, so they have to get right in there and do it.
Hmm.
I know that there's a lot of problems that when they do it, that the guys watching porn and their expectations from watching porn of how the woman is going to be and the things she's going to do and all of that. There's all these weird expectations I think that guys have, and that's causing a lot of problems, and making it more stressful for the women than it would be even otherwise because they think that these women, when they do engage with them, should act like a porn star, a woman porn star, and that's not the way most women want to carry out sex and that type of thing.
Mhm.
Want not to be too grotesque, but something that people should know too. Anal sex, I don't think would be anywhere near what it is as far as the number of people participating in it if porn hadn't kind of glorified it, made young people think that it's natural and that's normal and it's something to be desired. It actually, for women, it raises their chances of contracting HIV by 17 times. So there's 17 times the risk of HIV from anal sex than there is from vaginal sex. So most people don't know that. So again, especially most women. Some women I've heard on Christian campuses, some women are choosing, they're choosing to be sexually active because of all the reasons we've talked about, but they're choosing to offer anal sex, instead of vaginal because number one, there's no chance of pregnancy. Number two, this is weird, but they think they can still say they're a virgin, because they haven't had vaginal sex. So it's really it just all works better, Colleen, if we do it. God's design, God's
Mhm.
design, the Catholic Church's teachings on sexuality. I mean, those are the ideal. Those are
Yeah.
the ideal. Chastity, practicing chastity, non-marital chastity completely. And the other thing is that that's a great workout, so to speak, for the chastity muscle you're going to need to have when you're married. I mean,
Yeah.
because when you're married, you're going to need to not have sex with anybody else but your spouse as well. So
Chastity
we
applies to
all
both sides. It's not like it's just pre-marriage. You need chastity as the virtue for your entire lifetime, and then when you're married, you can have sex with your husband or wife, depending, like obviously, your spouse, but you still need to be chaste in how you like. Chastity doesn't go away; it's still a necessary virtue.
right, and that's what I'm saying is that as a new Catholic, I have a lot of admiration for that. Coming through what we described here today, through my learning experience, my curve that I've been going through, when I came across the Catholic teachings on sexuality, I thought, this is pretty much optimal, pretty much
Yeah.
optimal right here. So, I mean, it also, I don't know if I've shared this with you, but, there's payoffs besides not getting your heart broken in the hookup culture and not getting an STD or STI, however you want to, look at that. Women are they're more vulnerable to STIs, twice as vulnerable as men are just because of the anatomy. And also, that tissue down there is more porous than a guy's is. And so bacteria, viruses can penetrate easier. And also with women, um, it's usually silent. If they do get an STI, it's silent, asymptomatic. And so it can be in there for years before it's discovered. And then it's usually done a lot of damage. Like the classic is fallopian tubes being all just crusted over, because of, they call it PID, pelvic inflammatory disorder. And literally, there's that which makes a lot of women not able to have children. Then they're
Mhm.
infertile. But then there's also HPV, which is usually silent as well. My co-author in the book that I wrote, who was one of my former students, she was a sorority woman at the university when I was there in 2007, and then through I guess 2011 or so. And again, she gave me permission to share this, but she was living the typical sorority life that we're talking about, and what the things that she was under the impression she was supposed to be doing, sexually active. She ended up getting HPV, during that time period, and it was silent. She got married right after she got out of college. My wife and I went to the marriage. It was a beautiful marriage. And then about 4 or 5 years after that, she found out she's got stage one, cervical cancer, and she found out that she'd gotten HPV sometime in that sexually active period. So there's
Mhm.
there are benefits beyond the good that it does for the relationship, creating the pathway to marriage and that type of thing. There's these literal physical benefits as well. I'll just
Mhm.
name a couple others. Early promiscuity leads to higher chances of vaginal and cervical cancer. We just talked about that. And getting married, you know, the way I see it, Colleen, and again, this is controversial, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Women's, you know me, women's peak fertility is age 19 to 29. Okay, so and you can, if you look at a graph of it, if I could show you the graph, at about age 32, it's like women's fertility falls off a cliff. It drops by about 50% within 3 years, and then the other 50%, in the next 3 years. So a lot of women that are finding themselves, later in life, they haven't found a husband. They're nowhere near, they're maybe getting near their marriage, but they're not near to trying to have their first child. They find themselves in that situation. So my recommendation is for people to consider, at least consider, even though society is telling us, and there's some merit to it, I think, as far as get through school, get your job, maybe get a master's degree, and do all that, and make marriage your capstone of your life. I would behoove people. I would encourage people, especially young women, because they're the ones with this fertility issue more than the guys, because it takes quite a long time for the guys' fertility to go down. To consider getting married earlier, and then if you can find somebody that agreed to make it a cornerstone, of your life, because then you're going to hit that fertility peak. And the other thing is, you're going to hit your number of pregnancies is going to be higher, probably because women that aren't married, even though they are having some children out of wedlock, are having a lot less than the ones that are in marriage. So the further benefit that it gives women is none or minimal numbers of pregnancies, and none or minimal breastfeeding raises her lifetime chances of developing ovarian and uterine cancer. Delayed childbearing and fewer pregnancies raise the risks of lifetime development of breast cancer. A woman who has her first child around the age of 20, so somewhere around the age of 20, has half the chance of developing breast cancer as a woman who has her first child around the age of 30. So there's a big difference there as far as the prevention, as far as breast cancer goes, because there's a process there. It appears, in our ancestors, there was a natural process there where most of the women were getting married somewhere in their late teens or their, early 20s at the latest. The guys were, more like 24, 25, 26, because they're quite a bit older, 5 or 6 years older than the women, if you look at this historically, because they were out there finding a way to get a job to where they could support their wife and their family. When you have something in that ballpark, when you're imitating that natural, what I call natural lifestyle pattern, there's all these add-on benefits, all these ripple effects that I talked about earlier. One other quick thing, for the women that are casually sexually active, they should know that some of the recent research has shown that women with 10 or more lifetime sexual partners, that's 10 or more, which a bunch of these girls are getting these days,
Mm-hmm.
have a 91% higher risk of developing cancer overall. For men, it's 64% if they have 10 or more. So it's substantial for men as well, but 91% greater chance for a sexually active woman from a non-sexually active woman. So when you hear the body counts on a lot of other, podcasts, what's your body count, and being proud of it. Well, like my co-author, Sarah, there may be a problem that's going to come knocking, not too far down the road. And so
Yeah.
I guess my point is, God's ways, there's benefits to them, there's payoffs to them that aren't even apparent yet at the time that we're obeying them, that we're living them. So as a scientist, that was probably the thing when I came across that research. That's the thing that convinced me the most, that, hey, these Catholics, they know something. They know they know something about this, and this is pretty intimate, and it's pretty specialized and pretty high level. So, what else do they know about? So that I would say that.
Um, I guess your work was mostly with girls, so maybe you won't know the answer to this, but how did hookup culture affect guys negatively? Like, did you find that guys suffer from the humiliation of hookup culture as well?
Oh, I know this one pretty well too, because I run into a lot of guys. Let me just give you a story. This will be emblematic of a lot of them.
Okay.
And before I give you the story, let me just explain what dopamine depletion is. Because again, we're in an unnatural situation here, Colleen,
Hmm.
because up to 15, 20 years ago, this stuff wasn't going on. Certainly wasn't going on when I was, and I was came of age in the peak of the sexual revolution in the 70s. So, but the expectation of getting married, was very strong. I've been married since 1977. So, and I'm glad for every minute of it. But guys, what this does for guys, Colleen, is it puts them in a situation where it makes it so easy for them to become an addict, a sex addict. And what I mean by that is,
Mm-hmm.
um, guys were meant to have to work hard. As I was saying earlier, the 25, 26-year-old guys prove themselves, get a job, get a way to support their family, and then get married to the younger woman, usually even in their late teens in those days. Uh, and then the bearing of children started pretty soon after that. About age 20 is about the first when the women started having the children. What this does, without that marriage requirement, marriage norm, and commitment, and him turning his testosterone in a direction that is away from chasing women, for want of a better term, changing the direction of, okay, now I'm a provider and protector for my wife, and not only that, for these babies that are going to start arriving. And again, in the old days, in the natural situation, it turns their testosterone in a very positive direction. And I'll finish this comment off by telling you how positive and how it worked out in our past. But I'll say this first: with it not that way, with them just kind of like a kid in a candy store, enable
Mm-hmm.
all the candy's free, it's all open, unpackaged. We're talking about sex here, and readily available and everything. He'll just eat candy until he can't eat another bite, and he's sick of it. But it's like providing a ready way for him to be addicted. Now, I can't remember if I explained this when we've talked before, but dopamine, the way it works is that it's supposed to go up and kind of because you're working for it and it's hard to get. It's supposed to be rolling, kind of like rolling hills, and these rolling hills, they don't come around. The dopamine raises don't come around very often, so it's like this and maybe clear over to here before it goes up again and rolls back down. What they're getting with hookup culture is it's going up, straight up, and again, sexual release for guys is the highest natural high they can get. Straight up and then straight down. When it goes straight up and straight down like that, it goes to a lower level, lower baseline level. Then it's going to happen again
Mm-hmm.
quick, either porn or hooking up, and then down. It goes to a lower baseline level. So you got your up, down to a lower baseline level. When your baseline of your dopamine gets to a certain level, you're depressed, and that's what I've observed with the guys that I've come across. It can be porn, hooking up, a combination of the two, and probably you throw in gaming. Gaming also is a thing that where they're getting a dopamine spike. That's they don't have to work for it. There's no effort and there's no timing. There's no time distance between the two. So to give you the classic story, I was giving a sex IQ talk to presentation, I guess you say, to a sexual. It actually was a human sexuality class at one of the universities, and so we were talking about all these topics. And with college students, you don't hold anything back. Nothing was no words were minced. When it was over with, I had this young man come up to me, but he wasn't as young as most of the college students. He was, your typical 18 to 22-year-old. He had to be like 25, 26, 27, and he had an army pack, on his back. So I knew right away, okay, this guy is a service guy, and he's come back, after he served who knows how many deployments. So he's an older guy, but still, 25 or 26, and he's this veteran-looking guy, rough cut looking guy. And he looked me in the eye and he goes, because I talked about, how it's supposed to work as opposed to how it was working. He looked me in the eye. He said, I heard you. I heard every word that you were saying about that you shouldn't hook up and that you should go down, a sexual integrity pathway to marriage. He looked at me and he goes, and he just had hollow eyes. His eyes were just hollow, like an addict, like like a classic addict. He said, I want to do what you're saying. I want to make it special with one young woman. He goes, but all these young women are coming up to me, these beautiful young women here on campus, and offering themselves to me, kind of like what Carrie Cronin was saying.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, I don't know how to say no to him. I don't know how to turn him down. And I said, well, you just have to, you know, in the military, you learn to do things with discipline and that type of thing.
Mhm.
You have to take that approach. And also, there was a guy that was a pastor type guy that was with me that was just observing what I was doing. He was standing
Mhm.
right beside me. I said, because I was in the role of, the people that invited me to speak there were my friends who were my colleagues or my former colleagues from the
Mhm.
university. I got canceled that. And I didn't want to give them the trouble, so I didn't want to go into Christian beliefs with him right there. I just said, this guy right next to me here, talk to him because because he's got the answers, And so,
Yeah.
in answer to your question, he was the eyed, hollowest eyed looking person I think I've ever seen, other than an actual addict. So, and he's not the only one I've seen. This puts young men into a situation that's unnatural for them, and it brings them down. It's just like the other addictions, just like porn and even
Mhm.
gaming. But to finish that off, like I promised earlier, there's other research that's very encouraging, and it was done in 2015 in Bolivia, of all places. But they went and researched this group of, they call it traditional society, and the traditional society is a name for people who have not generally been touched by our Western civilization. In other words, they're still living like our ancestors did in the hunting and gathering years for
Mhm.
who knows how many thousands of years. And so this family down there, it was a natural family because it was a mom and a dad, and they had 8 kids because that's what's going to happen, if you don't if you don't have birth control, knowledge and all that. So natural family that way. But he would go out and hunt every day for them. And the one unnatural thing they did have clothes that looked like they're Western, made in some way. But they had chickens in the yard and crops, they were raising. But he would go out and hunt every day. And what they did was they went along with him, the scientists, and they took saliva samples all the way along. And they had rifles. That was the other difference between, the really old days and now. And it was 4, 5, 6 hours that they're out on the hunt and keep track of his testosterone levels, in the first time. And they came down for another study. I'll tell you about both. But on the first study, they found out that his testosterone levels went way up when he successfully shot the animal and brought it home to his family. On the second
Mhm.
one, they thought, I wonder what happens to his oxytocin, because normally, as I think I've told you before, high testosterone pushes the level of oxytocin down. It
Yeah.
blocks it. So
Yeah.
what they found out though was that when he, same thing, went out there, as 4 or 5 or 6 hours, they were out until they found and bagged the game. He got the testosterone high, but then his oxytocin went up too. Actually, his testosterone went down a little bit. His oxytocin came up to where they were concurrently high. And
Huh.
what I know about that is that, again, we're talking about people that haven't been touched by our civilization. They live in and out every day of getting food, providing food for the family. What I saw in that is that when a young man in our society goes down the pathway we're talking about, gets married, and starts having children and is working to provide for them, he's going to have the same effect. He's going to have testosterone. His levels are going to be high when he's able to be successful and bring home the bacon, so to speak. But also his oxytocin is high, and
Hmm.
when the young husband turned over the animal to his wife, his oxytocin was extremely high. And so what I saw with that is God's natural design, in the way Christian denominations in general, but especially the Catholic Church, describe the chaste courtship, chaste lifetime, just all the different things that are expected, the pathway that is described to us in the Catholic faith. And it causes us to develop healthy human hormones. And when you're like the guy, the young man that came up to me, the service kid, and was addicted to sex, hooking up on campus, his testosterone is going to remain really, really high because abnormally high, and his oxytocin is going to remain really, really low. That isn't a healthy hormonal, situation for him either. Because
Mhm.
again, we humans are designed to find our way into those relationships where we're sacrificing for each other. That's why the Bible, talks about husbands, sacrifice for your wife like Christ sacrificed for the church. Love your wife like Christ loves the church. So at that point that I saw and learned that research, it all kind of made sense to me. There's kind of a fork in the road, is what we're talking about here. If you're going down the
Yeah.
hookup culture fork, you're never going to have healthy hormones, whether you're a woman or a man. That's probably especially a man, because high testosterone, just like I read off to you the things with the advantages for women to have babies and have them somewhat early and have a lot of them and breastfeed them as far as
Hmm.
cancer goes. For men, having high testosterone also leads to higher risk of prostate cancer, for one thing. So
Hmm.
so you can really separate this out. It's exciting, really, that
Yeah.
you know the pathway that God has designed for us is healthier on every level than you can anticipate with the others. Literally, it's healthy for the guys, like I was saying.
Hmm.
Literally, what they've come to into in the research, Colleen, and anybody listening, for a man to not get married, he's lopping off about 10 years life expectancy of his life.
Wow.
For women, it's a lot less. It's like 2 years, but for men, it's a huge difference. So anyway, I'll stop there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And thank you for answering that question and just how it affects both sides. That's so interesting to know, both men and women. So,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
just, and when women, again, I say women mostly because they are equipped better for it. Again, 80% of them anyway are going into it with, they don't have all the testosterone and circulating. They don't have the three areas of their brain that are twice as big that have to do with sex than the men do. They're equipped to to say no, 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 no. We're not going to do that. And men's testosterone starts going in that direction, and their vasopressin starts going in that direction, where they're going in a bonding direction instead of a hookup or hit it and quit it, however they want to describe it these days. But if given the chance, though, I mean, most of them don't have the discipline. Even that military kid didn't have the discipline. When he's faced with all these willing, beautiful young women. So the system, it's a systematic problem. We talk about there being systemic this, systemic that. We got a
Mhm.
systemic problem with the way our bonding norms, our sexual norms, even are set up. And the great thing is that women have it, especially have the superpower if they decide as a group that if the 80 to 85% of them decide, hey, we're going to do this way, and there ain't going to be no more hooking up until this happens, until a marriage proposal, and well, actually a marriage takes place. That's what we're looking for, because that's your, they talk about consent. That's your
Mhm.
that's your rock solid consent, a form of consent. You're not only consenting between the two of you personally. You got all your friends and you got the city and whoever else you're associating with. That's the purpose of marriage from the beginning. Was this is not just a personal commitment. This is a commitment to the community, as
Mhm.
well. So,
Into the
and
church.
it was meant to be that way because then everybody's in on it. Everybody's in to support it. So,
Mhm.
anyways, I know I've become a marriage evangelist, but I really do think that it's a crucial element of our society that hookup culture is trying to destroy. And
Mhm.
I'm out to show people the science and say, hey, let's wake up. Let's realize what we're about to lose.
Well, and it's like God created us body, soul, composite. So obviously, what's good for you spiritually is going to be good for you physically. And some ways, it's nice that those go together because you can take someone who doesn't have an understanding of Christian religion and say, look, this is scientifically what's best for you. And you're more likely to be able to convince them than just saying this is wrong. Because if they don't have that understanding of right and wrong and God and the like Christian morals, the getting there is going to be a lot harder. But if you can start with, here's the science, this is why this is good for you, you can lead them down that path. And hopefully someday they'll be able to appreciate the science and the morals together. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually become my ministry, I think. So I don't really call it a ministry. I call it just an initiative. But
Yeah.
I can go into Christian spaces and do just what you're describing with them, kind of reinforce them, but go
Hmm.
into spaces that aren't Christian and just lay out the science for them, and they can draw their own conclusions. I don't have to really even bring up Christianity. So yeah, I mean, I'm really happy about that because I didn't ever anticipate this when I was back in just the standard wellness frame of mind. But
Yeah.
God has a way of moving us into where we're meant to be. And I don't know of many other people, that are doing this. And so anybody listening to this, I would love to help you with if that will help. If you're dealing with people that could benefit from knowing that science supports Scripture and just general Christian teaching, and especially Catholic teaching, I would love to work with you, especially young people, like maybe even upper high school students, like junior and senior high school students, and then through the college years, um, including the graduate years, and then also just young adults. These people, young people that are out of college and they're kind of at loose ends because now what do we do? So and money isn't an object to me. This is we'll make it work, on the that situation. So um, yeah, it's a passion of mine. After all that I've learned.
Well, thank you again for coming back on the show. As always, another great conversation about something that's so important. So thank you.
Thank you, Colleen, for having me, and appreciate you.
And to all of our listeners, please like, subscribe, check out the new ebooks we have coming out, and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.